very much, everyone, for having us on. So David Cannon actually is going to be doing the presentation tonight. I don't think I need to give a huge amount of introduction, but obviously he is well known as author of a number of the ITIL version 3 publications, but also lead editor of ITIL for Digital IT Strategy, and most recently ITIL for Acquiring and Managing Cloud Services that has only just been published a couple of weeks ago. So over to you, David, and take us away.
Right. Thank you, Mark, and thank you very much to the BCS group for hosting us. It's very good to be back here. Last time I met with this group was in person. Sorry that we couldn't do it this time, but it is really good to see you all together, and it's really good to be here. Thank you very much for having us. Right. Originally, we thought we would start talking about digital and IT strategy and what has happened since that book was released. But in fact, the thing that happened since that book was released is that another 2 books have been released by Axelos, one which is based on managing cloud services, and the other one which is about sustainability of digital and information technology. I was the lead editor for the Acquiring and Managing Cloud Services book, and so we thought, since it's hot off the press, this would be a good thing to share with the group. I'm going to share my screen in a moment. As I do that, oh, they already found out. Yeah, they're on their way to get me. Can you hear the sirens on the?
No.
No, I've got a bunch of sirens outside here, so let's just hope it's not me. There you go. You should be able to see my screen with the title slide on it. Can you?
Yes.
Good. So let me jump straight in. This is the latest ITIL book. It has been published just a couple of weeks back, and it focuses specifically on cloud services. It's not so much a book about how to apply all of the practices in ITIL to cloud, or how to use cloud to support the ITIL practices. It's more about how to manage cloud services, exactly what it says. It's about, if you are a professional in an organization that is using cloud services, how do you manage those services? As we go into the presentation, please do feel free to post questions in the chat. Those who have a microphone that is open, please do feel free to interject and ask questions or comment. We have quite a bit of time here, and I want to make sure that, that we have plenty of time for discussion as well. Right. I have the chat open, so anybody who posts anything into the chat, I will be able to get. So the new book is called Acquiring and Managing Cloud Services. It is part of the ITIL collection, and I will talk a little bit about the structure of that as we go through the presentation. So just starting out, I think over the past few years, cloud has made a number of promises. And there are a lot of expectations about what we can achieve with cloud solutions. Some of them are listed in the cloud in the middle of the slide there. So speed to market. Cloud is incredibly fast, it's incredibly flexible and scalable. Therefore, using cloud as an architecture enables us to be very agile, very quick to market. We can achieve greater business value. For example, we are able to launch new products and services. We're able to launch existing products and services to new markets. We're able to advertise and have our presence as an organization a lot more broad than we were before using cloud. So there's a lot more business value in using cloud. It's scalable, it's flexible, it's cost efficient. These are the promises that have been made by cloud. You'll notice there, though, that we have two boxes behind the cloud. On the one hand, we have a technical architecture, which represents the way in which cloud service providers configure and manage their systems and the way in which they expect us to consume those services. On the other hand, we have our consumer organization's operating model. And that operating model defines all of the components in the organization that need to be operational in order for us to be able to create value and achieve our objectives. I'm not going to go into detail on that because that's something that's fairly well understood both inside ITIL as well as in general business circles. Operating model is the basic component that we use to determine what goes to the cloud. The problem is that many organizations have a misalignment between the operating model that you use in their organization and the cloud technical architecture. And that misalignment causes a number of failures of projects. There are gaps between the capabilities offered by the cloud and what we expect the cloud to be able to do for us. There are some overlaps. So different cloud service providers provide services differently, and we may find that there are duplication of services or capabilities. And that especially happens if there is a little correlation between the operating model and the way we use cloud services. For example, if without referring to our operating model, we just allow anybody and everybody to be able to purchase and consume cloud services, then they may or may not consume services that are linked to or based on the operating model of the organization. A couple of comments here. I'm going to go back to front. Bhupinder, nice to see you. Does not see security highlighted in the operating model. Actually, security is extremely important, and I would argue that security is actually omnipresent. It's everywhere at every level in the operating model, as is availability. So a component in the operating model, to be effective, needs to be available. It needs to be secure. It needs to be fit for purpose. It needs to perform at the appropriate level. So all of those aspects are certainly included in the operating model. We can certainly call that out as one of the characteristics of the operating model. And we can certainly make sure that in each of those blocks, there are components of security management that have been built in. I wouldn't say that necessarily it's not there. It's just probably not called out. It is certainly critical, and especially as we're moving to the cloud, very important that, and I'm going to talk about this later, it is very important that the security measures that we use to keep our organizations safe are represented in the way that we use cloud services. And that's something very often that gets miscommunicated. So since you've raised it, Bhupinder, I'm going to just dwell on security a little bit. One of the common misconceptions is that because cloud is a secure environment, therefore security is automatic. And a lot of organizations move into the cloud assuming that whatever they put in the cloud is automatically secure. It is not. There are two different components to cloud security. There is the security of the cloud architecture itself, which is managed by the cloud service provider. They will do things like making sure that nobody has physical access into the data center where the physical equipment is hosted. They will make sure that the virtualization software they used has security features built into it. They will make sure that monitoring of the use of cloud is available, that the tools exist. However, they do not secure the applications that you put into the cloud. They do not secure data that is stored in the cloud. If you authorize a user to put data into the cloud and delete data from the cloud, they will not override that. So if you haven't provided secure access, if you haven't created policies about who has access to services and how to secure that access, it will not be secure. And a lot of the data that has been leaked from cloud services has been because the storage of that data has not been configured correctly. And because people were allowed access to that data that should never have had access to that data. That is the consumer organization's responsibility. All of the tools to provide secure access are provided by the cloud service provider, but the consumer has to configure them correctly and use them correctly. And very often that's one of the gaps that we see between the operating model in-house and what happens on the cloud environment. There is just a miscommunication or a misexpectation of who's responsible for what. I'm going to cover that in a lot more detail as we move through the presentation. David Norfolk, you say you're interested in managing the death of cloud services. So what happens when, and when I saw that first line, I thought we have a cloud skeptic here, but in fact, reading further, I see what you're talking about is the fact that cloud services, very easy to onboard. It's very easy to start using them. But what about stopping to use them? Is it just as easy to make sure that you decommission cloud services as it is to commission them? And the answer is very often no. And the reason for that is because it takes processes and disciplines to be able to offboard services that very often are neglected. And a couple of examples, you may spin up an environment, and that environment contains processing power, and it contains some middleware, and it contains data storage. And depending on the architecture, you may find that the processing, the server environment is separate from the storage environment, and the two are billed and procured separately. So you may have spun them up together and find that someone decided, well, we don't need that server anymore. Let's decommission it. They decommission the server, but forget to decommission the storage. And that storage continues to incur cost every month because it's being used. And if we don't have the asset management in place to understand that asset is being used and we're paying for it, then very often that does not get decommissioned. So the death of services or the decommissioning of services is an incredibly important component of your cloud strategy. And we'll talk about that in quite a bit of detail. I'm really glad that this group incorporates the IT asset management group as well, because that is such an important component of cloud management, which is kind of counterintuitive. A lot of people say, well, the whole purpose of moving to cloud is that you don't have any assets anymore. You don't own anything because it's all owned by the cloud service provider. And financially, that may be true. But from a usage point of view, you do have assets in the cloud. You do have valuable information in the cloud. You do have valuable components that are critical for meeting business value in the cloud. And you need to be able to track those, report on them, understand the status of where they are in their cycle. And if you can't do that, it's very, very difficult to manage things like decommissioning. So thanks for those questions. I think those are very important. Now,
David, as
yes.
the resident IT asset manager, you have just made me so happy.
I'm glad to hear that. It is such an important thing, and again, I think it's an area that is sadly neglected in many cloud implementations.
Absolutely.
Oh, here's another great question. We haven't even started the presentation yet. I'm getting great questions. Let's continue on that. So about cloud assurance is, how do you make sure that the semantics of cloud services match the semantics you use for in-house? So semantics, by that I assume you're really talking, David, about You're talking about the terminology you use, what you call things, how you categorize things. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's true.
I think with things like AWS, because they tend to meld services together. And when you think you buy, quote unquote, a security service, it may not contain the things that you think that the security service should contain. And that
exactly.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true. And I'm going to talk about a little bit why that is in a moment. But it is true that the architecture that is used in the cloud environment, it represents the way in which the cloud service provider manages and delivers their services. It does not represent the way you consume those services necessarily. And so if there are specific terminologies and specific procedures and specific ways of doing things in the cloud that you need to be familiar with and accommodate into your processes, architectures, etc., that is part of the strategy or part of the process of migrating into the cloud. That translation has to take place. And of course, there's a lot of debate about this. Do you change your terminology? Do you expect them to change theirs? Good luck with that, by the way, because they won't. And I'll explain why. So do you change your terminology, or do you have some sort of global mapping table which says when we say this, what we mean is that? There's a lot of debate about that. We'll talk about that a little bit further on, but it is certainly one of the reasons why there is a gap between the consumer's operating model and the cloud technical architecture. By the way, there is a lot of guidance published by various cloud service providers about this. So you will see a lot of documentation around how to relate to their architecture, certification programs where you are trained in how their architecture is set up and configured and what it all means, what services are mapped to what kind of functionality and so on. There is quite a lot of information out there about that, to the extent, I think, that there is so much that it becomes a little confusing. And as a result, we have a number of third-party organizations having to come into the middle of this and try and create some clarity for us. So I'm going to talk about that as well in a moment. David, you have a number of questions here. It's great. How do you validate that a cloud supplier has the physical data center security you think you should have? Well, I can tell you that's very difficult. I like your example there. What if the supplier employs a system programmer that hates you because you sacked them, or just because they read something about you on Twitter? Very good point there. How do you identify those risks? And immediately I can say that the cloud service provider is not required to disclose that information to you. And the best they will do is to provide you certification of their level of security. Certification meaning compliance to a standard or regulation, an audit provided by a third party, or an equivalence statement. So you may say, well, we require them to be compliant with this regulation in this country. Cloud service provider like AWS, for example, will say, you know what, we operate in 120 countries. We cannot be certified across all of them at the same time, especially since there are slight differences between those regulations. But what we can do is show you where we are certified, and we can provide you an equivalence statement as to what that means in your country. So, these are some of the ways in which we can work that, but there is very little you can do about the scenario that you raised. And someone has gone to work for them that may not like who you are, or that may compromise your security. The best you can do is configure your side so that you are secure and trust that what the service provider has certified to you is accurate. As far as physical access to data centers, this is rigorously controlled. Only and I, through firsthand experience, only certain categories of employees get into that data center. And I say employees, there are no third-party guests. There are no customer tours that show you what the data center looks like. There may be a window into something that looks like a data center that shows you how it's set up, but you will not have access into that. It is very strictly and rigorously controlled by most cloud service providers. Again, I have to state that not all cloud service providers are equal. When we say cloud service provider, generally people understand, oh, AWS, Azure, Google. There are many more cloud service providers than that. Not all of them as big, obviously. And some of them very boutique. And the level of security is not guaranteed. And so it is up to us as consumers to perform due diligence, to require that audits are done and that you have a copy of the audit report or something similar to that, or a certificate of compliance. And that's about the best that you can do. Yes, Bhupinder, you're right. I'm going to come back to that point in a moment in terms of how do you tie down the ability of a developer to upload confidential data, for example, into a test environment and then have that data leak in because it was not configured correctly. And we'll talk about that. A lot of debate about that point. Again, because a cloud service provider will say, if you can't secure it in-house, you won't be able to secure it in the cloud. It's the same thing. But on the other hand, there is an extra step involved of moving from one organization to the other. I used to work in shipping. It's where I got a lot of my background. And the rule in shipping is that you move cargo as few times as possible, because every time you move cargo, it is subject to damage. And exactly the same is true of data. The more steps there are in transmitting data from one place to another, the more likely it is that that data could be compromised. Now, of course, everybody's going to swear blind that their piece of that data transfer is secure, but you cannot take that for granted. There is so many more things that have to be configured, that have to be assured, that have to be certified, the more steps you take in transmitting data, and not only data, but functionality as well. Is there a place for an independent, trusted third party that does the verifications you would want to without breaking supplier trust? Yes, there is. Now, again, some would argue that this does exist from some of the industry bodies that are out there to a greater or lesser degree. The industry bodies that are out there tend to be, how can I say, there tend to be hundreds of them. There are so many of them out there. Some of them are based on supplier consortia, so a number of suppliers that have got together and created an independent but supplier representing body that sets standards, certifications, and so on and so forth. In different countries, you will have representatives of regulators or standards bodies that perform that function. But again, you have to question to what degree they have access to the components that they need to see to be able to certify them as secure. So yeah, a number of issues here. And I don't want to say something that's going to get me into trouble. Everybody on all sides of the fence will say it is secure. I would say it is secure as you make it. There are more complexities to securing a cloud environment than there are in securing an environment that is 100% in-house. And the more complexity is, the more chance there is that things can go wrong. And that's exactly what's happening. This difference between the cloud consumer's operating model and the cloud technical architecture is the source of a number of different issues. The one thing I'll say is that it's important that we as cloud consumers try to replicate as far as possible the components that we need in our operating model. If you cannot do that, then you have to ask the question as to why you would move that into the cloud in the first place. So thank you. Yes, David. Yes. Rigorously controlled access to the data center, unless you're a cleaner, in which case you kind of move with, without any constraint. Yes, and we all know stories about things being plugs being pulled out of power outlets and things going down. Yes, so I will say though that I think cloud service providers in general, reputable cloud service providers, do put a lot of attention into making sure that that kind of access and that kind of mishap does not occur. Of course, there are always mistakes that get made, but then there are always mistakes that get made under our watch too. So the cloud service providers, I think, put a lot of effort and investment into creating as secure an environment as they can. And the way I've heard it described by AWS is this. AWS will say, we are responsible for the security of the cloud. We take that responsibility very seriously. But you as a consumer are responsible for security in the cloud. The way you use cloud services, the way you configure those cloud services, the access you provide to those cloud services, that is on you. And therefore, you are responsible for making sure your security policies are correctly set. Okay, let me move on. And I want to look at the reality of the situation. So remember, if I go back 2 slides, we said here are some of the promises that have been made by cloud, and not just by cloud service providers, by the way, by cloud in general. These are claims that have been made by CIOs within organizations who proposed such great cloud strategies as cloud first. We'll talk about cloud first in a moment. I'll never forget that, going into an organization who boastfully claimed that they did not need a 5 or 20-page strategy. All they needed was a 2-word strategy, and it was cloud first. Not doing so well a couple of years down the line. We'll talk about why that is. Right, so here are some of the claims that have been made on cloud service providers, etc. These are some of the expectations. Cost is going to be reduced. Well, in reality, only 34% of organizations actually achieved a reduction in cost that they anticipated. 34%, that is a 2/3, greater than 2/3 failure of that objective. Speed to market, right? It's so quick to use the cloud. It's easy to use the cloud. We can get products to the market a lot quicker. Only 28% of organizations actually increased their speed to market. Service levels. Only 1/3 of organizations, in fact, less than 1/3, or about 1/3 of organizations achieved the expected level of service. In terms of business value, yeah, we're going to be able to create a business model that makes us more competitive, that gets us to the market, a greater percentage of the market, enables us to launch new products, new services. Only 35% of services were able to achieve that business value. And those data points come from a number of sources. We did quite a bit of research on this, as well as through a number of research companies and so on. And the results have been consistent. I'm not just taking the worst case here. This is pretty much a reflection across the board of the research that we performed or that we had access to. Yes, we do actually have sources for those. They're in small print down there, but we can certainly give you some of those.
Yes.
You know, yeah, we went across the board and just got as much research as we could And this is really a snapshot across all of them, but they're consistent. They're absolutely consistent. Which was surprising to us. You know, normally when you go in for research like this, you'll find that somebody has an axe to grind and they want to use that data to sell a particular tool or functionality, whatever. And in this case, we just found just consistency across the board in all of these stats. Yes, URLs, absolutely. In fact, there is a short way to do this, and that is just say top 10 issues experienced by cloud consumers. And that'll get you quite a bunch of research to get you started, but I can certainly tell you where we got these as well. Is this because they're buying into fixed term contracts? Actually, no. The point with cloud is that you should not be buying fixed term contracts. Cloud is, you know, the purpose of moving to cloud very often is to be able to scale up or down or sideways very, very quickly and easily. And therefore, you do not want to tie yourself into fixed term contracts with minimum usage and so on. Yes, there are cases where people have done that, and that's not a good thing to do. What is happening there is that organizations are trying to use a cloud strategy that mirrors the strategy that they had when they owned the equipment. And those two strategies couldn't be more different. Strategy when you use equipment, when you purchase your own equipment, is based on a capital expenditure strategy. In other words, you buy more equipment than you need so that you can deal with peaks and troughs of demand. Well, in the cloud, you don't do that. The peaks and troughs on demand are real time. And if you're going to buy minimum usage, what you're trying to do is you're trying to replicate some sort of, you know, maximum benchmark or threshold that you would have in-house. You are going to end up spending more because, you know, what do you do with the troughs? There's no cost saving involved there. So yeah, that is not a very good thing to do. Bipinda says these look quite high. And I would say, yes, there are some organizations that have had some very nasty experiences with cloud. There are some that have had great experiences with cloud. And one of the things we did as we were writing this book was to ask, what's the difference? Why do some have great experience and others have very bad experiences? And we had some interesting answers, which I'm going to get into in a moment. Just some further information. These are some of the issues that people face. And I think it reflects the discussion we're having here. Security, number one. Why, you know, how do we get our services more secure? How do we know that the services that we put into the cloud are secure? How can we trust that if we configure something in the cloud, that we've configured it correctly? All kind of questions. And to be honest, there's not a lot of confidence in the security of cloud services. And I have to be honest, it's not because cloud services are inherently insecure. It's because the usage of cloud services generally tends to be quite insecure. And it has to do with a lack of knowledge. It has to do with that disconnect between the operating model in-house and the cloud, the way we use or support that operating model using cloud. It has to do with semantics. It has to do with differences in architecture and many more things. A lot of work to be done before you can be confident in the security of cloud services. Managing cloud spend, second highest concern, second highest issue. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but I have to say, you know, moving from ITIL 2 to 3, we had a lot of people saying, okay, cool. We don't have to worry about that pesky service delivery book anymore. We're going to focus on all those service support things. Great, service operation. You can operate services very well without having to worry about that stuff in the service delivery book. Capacity management in many organizations took a backward, I mean, it was kind of reversed out of the scene. And I have to say, one of the biggest reasons why cloud spend is not meeting, why we're not meeting our cloud spend objectives or spend reduction objectives, is because we are unable to forecast workloads correctly. What do I mean by that? Well, very simply, cloud saves you money if and only if you use the cloud service in exactly the same way as you use the service in-house. If you use it any more than you used in-house, or if your code is any less economic than the code you used in-house, you will spend more money. Very simply, I mean, we know this, right? You create a great application. It performs beautifully. And then suddenly marketing goes and promises a 20% reduction in cost as long as you sign up for the service tomorrow. And suddenly you're inundated with people trying to sign up for a service, and nobody told IT. Now, in general, in the past, we've been pretty good about handling that. Why? Well, because we invested in spare capacity, and we write it off over 5 years. We can do this. We have the spare capacity. We can repurpose machines from one part of the data center to another part of the data center virtually. Very easy for us to do that when you own the equipment. But when you're in the cloud and marketing pulls a stunt like that, there is no spare machine. There is no spare capacity. You pay per transaction. So suddenly, one marketing drive and your budget is blown out of the window because there is no spare capacity to carry the workload. Capacity management always said, manage the workload. And what they meant by that was, don't just take your server workload from the past 3 years and project it forward. That's not capacity management. What you do is you define what the workload on a particular device is. You then map that workload to activities performed by users. And when you can predict how the activities of users is going to change over the next 3 months, then you trace that back and you can model your workloads. We suddenly forgot that step. That is no longer done in many capacity management practices. And so as a result, we say, well, of course, we're going to save money because look at this. Here's our past 3 years of trended server utilization. And, we've got way too much server. We're only using 60% of the server. And then suddenly, yes, you were using 60% on average, but you're also carrying these peaks and troughs by doing that. When you move into the cloud, no such thing. You're paying for every single thing that you do. And if your workload was forecast inaccurately, if your user patterns of behavior or business patterns of PPAs were not forecast correctly, you're in trouble. And that's exactly what's happening. Lack of expertise, knowledge, that's going to take a while for everybody to get trained up. And one of the key things is not only understanding how the cloud works, it's understanding the thing that we were talking about earlier, how to map the things we do in-house to the way we do things in the cloud. That kind of skill set still has a long way to go. Governance and control, big issue. And then again, I have to say, I'm probably a little bit jaded here. I have to say that you can get away with a lot when you're not governing things in-house, because you know who to pick up the phone to and you can get things fixed. But when you're in the cloud, you're dealing with tools and you're dealing with, paying for every single thing that you do, and you're dealing with controls that you don't actually own. It becomes a little bit more difficult. I think translating your in-house governance and control measures into the cloud can be very challenging. Compliance, again, especially in organizations that operate in multiple countries, and where cloud service providers are hosting them in a single country because it's a virtual environment. Managing multiple clouds, we're going to talk about later. Performance and service levels, big problem, and I'll explain why in a moment. And one very important thing, because in cloud, in theory, there is no lock-in because the services are standardized. And yet somehow 53% of organizations have managed to get themselves into a vendor lock-in position. So how did they do that? And yeah, we'll talk about that as well. In terms of the ITIL books, before I move to that, David, you had a comment in there. One cost issue is that storing data may be free, but extracting it often isn't. So you may have egress charges, usage of data charges when data is available on the cloud, and people using it more than you expected. So yeah, it's one thing to store it there, it's another thing to access it. And that's also very true. I had an example where the data was relatively cheap, and therefore, and it was a research facility, and they had a lot of data. It was actually medical DNA research is what they were doing, huge quantities of data. The data storage itself was relatively cheap, but the scientists insisted on storing all versions of the data in close to real-time, I'm losing my words, close to real-time extraction of the data from the device, instead of using slower methods or semi-offline or even archived data, which would have been a lot cheaper. But no, everything had to be stored close to real time. And that cost them a huge amount of money. It wasn't the actual storage, exactly as you're pointing out, David. It wasn't just the storage that was expensive. It was the speed that they required to access that data that cost them the money. So in terms of where this book fits, Axelos has created an extension to the core books. They actually have two categories of material. One is supplementary guides, and supplementary guides will take an aspect of some of the guides that you in the core material and maybe expand them or provide more detail around a particular context that's in that book. But the extension modules actually are another add-on. They actually add significantly new materials to what is in the core. And these two books are therefore in the ITIL extension module section of the library. Now, there are a number of other publications that are coming out that are related to ITIL. Of course, David Barrow, who's on the call, is responsible for writing and producing one of those that is being published by TSO that is also related to ITIL, and that is classified as supplementary material, all extremely valuable in accessing and understanding ITIL. I fully expect there to be some supplementary material related to the cloud book around some of the subjects that we've been discussing. And cannot wait to see that happen, because we were restricted to, I think, 220 pages. We would have loved to write 1,220 pages and we still would not have been done. So expect to see some more supplementary guides coming out around cloud. I think that'll be something to look forward to. Now, there's a lot of commonality between the cloud book and the DITS book, Digital and IT Strategy book. And this is one diagram that appears in both. I'm not going to give the long version. There's a bunch of text associated with this. You can look at that in the book. But one of the common things that happens in digital technology, and when organizations become or base their business model on digital technology, this particular sequence of events starts to happen. So generally what happens is we use digital technology because it's innovative. It enables us to do new things, or it enables us to do things that we already do in a different way. And yes, sorry, before I move on to this, yes, David, that is correct. You can take the cloud extension module without the ITIL foundation. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is possible. And that's because a lot of what we write about in managing the cloud is based on fundamental ITIL concepts. This idea that you have a service provider and consumer relationship, for example, is still fundamental, and both sides have responsibilities. is a fundamental aspect of service management, and it's a fundamental aspect of cloud, but it is not covered in the cloud book because it's in the foundation. So I would strongly recommend, if you are going to recommend that people do this course or read this book, please do recommend that they at least are familiar with the concepts in the ITIL Foundation. Now, let's just talk about innovation. What happens with digital technology, and the reason we use it very often, is because it is highly innovative. It gives us functionality or capabilities that put us ahead of our competitors. That's if we're a commercial entity. If we're a government entity, it actually helps us to be more effective. And honestly, I had a tough time sometimes. I understood this conceptually, but in sometimes my experience of some government departments really didn't reflect that. And then I met with the Dutch income tax office. And I was told by them and shown statistics by them, which said that the higher the level of service that they provide to Dutch citizens, the higher the percentage of those Dutch citizens that actually pay their taxes and do not try to evade taxes. So there is evidence to show that good quality service and high levels of capability in government agencies actually enable countries to be more effective. So I certainly want to stress that this is true whether you're a government agency or whether you're a commercial entity. This does actually enable you to make yourself more effective, more efficient. And if competition is a concern, it does enable you to put yourself ahead of competitors. It's innovative. But there's an issue with innovation. Innovation is short-lived. It enables you to get ahead of competitors. But as soon as you have enough customers using that innovation, they demand consistency, repeatability, and high levels of quality. Now, innovation by its very nature is not those things. You have to work very hard to take innovation to the level where it is consistent, where it is repeatable, where it does produce high quality. And so over time, innovation becomes something that is clearly understood and which can be operated effectively at multiple levels in the organization. It involves training people how to manage it and how to operate it. Well, the more you train people how to do it, the more people do it, the less innovative it becomes, because more and more people do it until eventually anybody can do it. And when anybody can do it, everybody's doing it. It becomes a commodity. And the thing about commodities is that they can easily be outsourced. And that's exactly what cloud services are. And the reason I wanted to focus on this is because it is a fundamental component of cloud services that you are buying commodities. You are buying services that have been so well used in the industry that everybody is using them. And because everybody is using them, you can basically have a large-scale provider pool a bunch of resources and use a fairly small number of resources to provide services to thousands of customers. And that's exactly what cloud service providers do. What's interesting, though, is that many organizations assume that because the technology used by cloud service providers behind the scenes is very innovative, therefore the services they provide are innovation services. They're not. They're commodities. They're standardized and they are available. The same service is available whether you're a 3-person organization or whether you are a 3,000-person organization. Those are the services you use. Now, do you get a better bargain, a better discount if you use 3,000? Absolutely. But you don't get to go into Amazon and say, by the way, I would like you to customize your servers, your server services, because I have 3,000 users and I demand this particular functionality, which is unique to my organization. They're not going to do it. Forrester called that the uneven handshake. It means that you depend on the cloud service provider for the success of your business. The reverse is not necessarily true. The cloud service provider depends on the success of 1,000 customers, all using the service in the same way for them to make a living. And that's what they do. So one of the very important and fundamental components of the cloud book is to really get this message across. Do not try to get cloud service providers to be unique. That's not their strength. If that's what you're trying to do it in-house. Cloud is not where you need to be. Now, there are one or two exceptions to this. One exception is, for example, Google, who, in fact, they all do this, but I'll mention Google as one example, who provides access to their artificial intelligence online lab, where you get to model certain things using their innovative artificial intelligence tools. That's not the same thing as buying virtual servers or buying storage. A very different sell, and it is something that they provide. It's some capability that they have, but it is not how they make their living. It is not the core of their business. So yes, there are some exceptions where you can get access to highly innovative solutions on the cloud, but believe me, you're going to pay very dearly for those compared to storage, servers, processes, etc. Okay. Lovely question, Ian. Do organizations need to migrate to a zero trust architecture before moving to cloud? Actually, that would help a lot. That would really help a lot. If that was your going in point, it would certainly help you to iron out some of those issues with cloud security. So I would say it's not a requirement, absolutely, but I think it would certainly help a lot in terms of making sure you have the right policies and the right practices in place before you move into the cloud. Okay, so now just some theory, and I think you know a lot of this already, but just want to show you what is covered. We talk about the types of cloud service, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, and those are the three types we cover in this book. We do not cover any other type of cloud service. It's those three. Well, what about XaaS, which is short for anything as a service or everything as a service? What about functionality as a service? What about, you name it? Business process as a service was one that we considered very strongly. We decided not to include any of those because, in fact, there are literally more than 1,000 of them. And we would be defining them, before we got, we wouldn't have any room left to write about anything else. So we restricted it to these three. But if you think about it, almost every cloud service is a version of one of these three things. Even things like functionality as a service is really just an application of a different type of software as a service. Business process as a service. Actually, what that is software as a service augmented by human activity that is being performed on your behalf. And so you would manage those things very much in the same way as you would manage a software as a service or a platform as a service or an infrastructure as a service solution. So, yes, there are some differences, but we simply could not fit them all into a book of this scope. Now, one very important thing about the cloud is, and of course, this is a variation of some of the diagrams you will have seen from cloud service providers. So you look at the various layers of technology, and if it's in-house, you do them all. If it's infrastructure as a service, you do the top number up to operating system that you're responsible for, and then the cloud service provider takes the rest. Platform as a service, they take a little bit more. Software as a service, they take a little bit more. But the interesting one that none of them actually talk about is the second one down, service management. Who's responsible for that? Well, in-house, we are. And I always love those cloud service providers that say, we do service management as a service. No, no such thing. They may do some functions of service management as a service. But service management, excuse me, let me just clear my throat. Oops. Right, that's it. They were right. I am talking too much. Service management is a capability that is always part of the governance structure of the consumer organization. You can never delegate responsibility for the quality of services and the outcomes that are achieved by services to a cloud service provider or any service provider. We are always responsible for what services achieve. So yes, certain aspects of service management, certain tools, certain activities can certainly move across to the service provider, but we still retain overall responsibility for those. And that's something that's very often misunderstood. So I know there was an argument on Facebook a few months back, which said, why will the service provider not give me a service level agreement for problem management? Or why should they? If you have to escalate something to them, it's not a problem. As far as they're concerned, it's an incident. They will never let you participate in their problem management meetings. Neither will you let your users participate in your internal problem management meetings. There are exceptions, of course. And so this idea that there are certain things that are delegated to the cloud service providers and there are certain things that have to be kept in-house is absolutely critical to successful cloud management. So you'll see the two arrows in the slide there are two different colors, right? Very important in a cloud relationship is this concept called a shared responsibility model. And we talk about it, quite a bit in the book. What is a shared responsibility model? And yes, the comments coming through on chat are absolutely correct. You can never outsource accountability. You can delegate certain activities, but you can never outsource accountability. If you decide to move things into the cloud, you still own the fact that those need to perform effectively and achieve the purpose that you set out to achieve. So the same is true here. In a shared responsibility model, what that does is it defines the activities that are your responsibility, and it defines the activities that are responsibility of the cloud service provider. Interestingly, whenever you read about cloud or shared responsibility models, the first thing they talk about, and very often the only thing they talk about, is security. Very few shared responsibility models actually talk about service management activities. And yet that is one of the most critical things that need to be agreed. One of the biggest causes of friction between cloud service providers and their consumers is service management practices. Who does what? When a change needs to be made, how does that get assessed and how does it get approved? How does it get paid for? These are hugely contentious issues, and it's mainly because the shared responsibility model was not clearly defined when we moved into that relationship. And you do have to go down into very detailed level to define who is responsible for what. Multiple types of cloud: private, public, hybrid, multi. Oh my goodness. They're all different, but one misconception about private. There is a definition of private which says, I'm going to have my own cloud infrastructure, but I'm going to host it in my own data center. That is not the definition we used here. Definition of private that we used is when you commission a cloud service provider to provide you with a unique service for your organization, using the type of features that can commonly be found in cloud, things like pay-as-you-go, on-demand access, and so on and so forth. It's still cloud because it's provided by an external service provider, and it is kind of formulated as a cloud architecture, but it is not cloud in that it is dedicated to a single consumer. And so it's managed a little bit differently from other types of cloud. And that's covered in a bit of detail in the book. An interesting feature that's come across here, we know about public cloud, that's the most common one. Hybrid is where you combine cloud services with maybe in-house solutions to come up with the service. Multi-cloud is a very interesting one. Multi-cloud is a set of technology which allows you to perform the same workload across multiple clouds. They're even talking about something which is in experimental stages right now called polycloud, where you can take individual pieces of functionality and farm them out to different cloud service providers and yet maintain a cohesive, consistent service as an output. But that's still on its way. And it reminded me, and something I'd like to just mention on this call, that we are still very much in the early stages of cloud. I know a lot of people like to think it's been around forever, but realistically, cloud as a mainstream option has really only been available for the last 10 years. It's still new. We're still cutting our teeth. Still a lot of unanswered questions. So this book is timely, not because it provides all the answers, but because it raises the questions that you need to have answered before you move into the cloud or create a cloud contract. Isn't on-premise cloud just a special case of private cloud with a more restrictive SLA? A little bit more than that. It is that. But in addition to that, remember, you own all the equipment. So you're not getting economies of scale, and you are able to hide the impact of, again, a bad workload forecasting. So you're not incurring higher costs when there is more of a workload. By the way, that reminds me of something else. Another common mistake when moving to the cloud is that charging systems have not been implemented before you move into the cloud. And yet cloud is pay as you go. And what we find happening is that many IT departments, they don't have any charging in place. They're told to move to the cloud because it's cheaper. They move to the cloud, but they still keep all of the costs in the IT department. They do not have a way of showing the impact of cost back to the consumers, back to the business units. And so the benefits of using the cloud are lost because it's still IT, you're so expensive. Why are we paying you so much? Oh, well, you couldn't get it right saving money by moving to Amazon. How about we just move to Amazon ourselves? And then you have this disconnect between different units in the organization. And yes, IBM-based bureau computing was very similar to cloud. It was a pay-as-you-go mechanism where you could get data processed by the whatever quantity it was that was measured. Absolutely. Very, very early, by many definitions, that was an early application of cloud. The only thing that it does not comply with is real-time access through the internet. But yes, very similar in principle to cloud services. How are we doing on time, by the way? I'm very conscious that this has been a great discussion, but I think I've kind of gone overboard on time.
David, we've got about half. I mean, we said
okay.
we could run through to 8 o'clock. So
all right. About half an hour left.
Yeah, but so I guess it's sort of up to you how quickly you want to move things, and I guess, you know, we just need to be understanding if you skip a few questions.
I'm fine. I could talk all day about this stuff, as you can hear from my voice. I worry about the tolerance level of everybody on this call. So I'm enjoying this discussion immensely, by the way, and I really like the comments that are coming through, and thank you so much. It's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, you're not losing anybody if that's
good.
That's a comfort.
That's good. That's good. Now, in addition to cloud service providers, and there's a huge amount of confusion. And honestly, when we started writing this book, we thought there's a cloud service provider. They do everything, right? No, they don't. And the cloud service providers put us straight very quickly on that one. They said, we don't do the stuff you say we do. Sizing, migration assistance, planning. We don't do that stuff. I said, yeah, you do. You're AWS, you're Azure. No. That is done by our professional services group. As far as we're concerned, they're a partner. We work with them and we work with other partners throughout the industry. And suddenly we realized, hold on, we've always thought of this as one monolithic organization, AWS, Azure, Google, that provide these cloud services. They don't view themselves that way. They view themselves as, we provide the cloud services. These are highly standardized commodities. If you want to help with planning, if you want to migrate, if you want to model what your cloud services are going to look like, the best we can do is give you a proof of concept. Other than that, you need a consulting company, or you need a migration partner, or you need, the list is endless. And in fact, here's just some examples of the industry that has sprung up around cloud service provision. These are the kind of partners that are involved that have sprung up alongside the Amazons. And let's not just limit it to those three. Let's talk about ServiceNow, for example, Sherwell, for example. These are also cloud service providers. They provide software as a service, Salesforce.com, and so on and so on and so on. Each of them have a partner infrastructure that helps them do things that they simply don't do because they focus on providing commoditized services to the industry. So here are some different categories. There are resellers. All they do is resell services. They help you negotiate a good deal or a good discount. By the way, for most organizations, you can pretty much do that yourself because the volume discounts are published online. Anyway, for any resellers on here, apologies, of course, you add a tremendous amount of value, mainly as an advisor. Then you have a broker. So a broker goes a step further and says, okay, we'll sit in between you and the cloud service provider, and we will tell you what you need. We'll source the right cloud service provider for you, and we'll make sure that you get the requirements that you need met. Interestingly, once they have brokered the service, take a step back. It's then between you and the cloud service provider. They can certainly help by giving you some further advisory services, but they don't get involved with the management of the services. If you need help with that, you then need to go to a managed service provider. There are a bunch of companies who actually will manage your cloud solution on your behalf, as if it wasn't complex enough already, but okay. Their job is to try and make the task a lot easier, to make sure that your security standards are met, et cetera, do a lot of reporting for you, do the cost analysis for you, and so on. There's certainly a lot of value there, but that is a different kind of service provider. There's the consulting and advisory. That's probably the group that's gonna help you with the most things. They'll help you define your strategy. They can act as a broker or reseller for you, or help you identify the right cloud services. They'll help you plan and design the services or the architecture that you need, redefine your processes so that they work with this cloud service provider's environment, implement and onboard. They don't run and operate. The only one who runs and operates is the managed service provider. And then they can help you optimize your solution. Then there's the implementation partner. All they do is they migrate you to the cloud. Generally, you'll find that implementation partners are also consulting and advisory partners. But there are some specialized ones. And then there are those solution development houses. Always surprised me. Salesforce.com, for example, worked for an organization that will remain nameless, but they're on my LinkedIn profile. Bought Salesforce.com as their CRM / financial record keeper of all sales and Salesforce automation, etc., all in one. Supposedly, Salesforce was so commoditized that it would do most of what you needed out of the box. All you needed to do was put names and link arrows and so on. But the company had a dedicated development team in an IT department of about 25. 10 of those were developers for Salesforce. Interesting, kind of negates the effect of having cloud service provider. And you then expose yourself to a significant amount of risk. Because when a software as a service provider updates their software, they update their software. They don't ask you whether your customizations are still going to work. And so it's up to you. The more development you do to complement or on top of a cloud solution, the more at risk you're putting your organization. So anyway, that's another whole subject on its own. There you go. Yeah, so ServiceNow is a very good example of how this works. We're going to talk about exit strategies a little bit later on as well, by the way. And Bhupinder, your comment, the only thing that's changed here is that cloud is being used as a prefix and a pretext for innovation, but you still very often get a low level of service from experts. And that's also to be expected because this is so new. And, you know, as they say in the land of the blind, the one-eyed person is the monarch. Have to be politically correct. Oh, we can't even use that metaphor anymore. Never mind. So, you know, just being one step ahead, even though you're not the world expert, means that you're providing guidance. So yes, we have a lot to learn here. It is a very immature industry. As much as we would like to think that it is well advanced, it isn't. In the book, you will find several pages of information about how to define the requirements for and business cases for moving to the cloud. And we use the standard definition that we use across all ITIL books, which is value, outcomes, costs, and risks, or more accurately, value, which is based on the achievement of outcomes and whether you can remove costs, introduce fewer costs or lower costs, and remove risks, or introduce lower risks than you currently have. And that results in cloud value. So we use that kind of formula, or that approach, I would say it's not really a formula, that approach to articulate the requirements and business case for moving to the cloud. And as I say, there are pages and pages and pages of information related to each one of those aspects. What we found very helpful was we looked at the DSV book, the Drive Stakeholder book, Drive Stakeholder Value book. And in that book, they take you through the journey, the consumer journey. The interesting thing as we went through this, though, as we looked through the cloud, through the DSV book, what we found is that the consumer journey can be defined from the service provider point of view. But we were writing this book from a consumer point of view. And what we realized is that things happen slightly differently in this journey when you're a consumer than when you're a service provider. One of the examples is requirements. Requirements get defined in DSV under the offer stage. What we found is if that's the first time you start thinking about requirements, you're way too late. We're, as consumers, we're already thinking about high-level requirements in the explore stage. When we're trying to set up a strategy, what are we trying to achieve by moving to the cloud? You already have some requirements specified. You refine and expand on those requirements as you meet service providers, as you get advice from cloud service provider partners. So then during offer, you communicate your requirements to the cloud service provider or to the partner. And so we had to adjust this journey a little bit based on the fact that the book was written for consumers, not service providers. And raises another question, which is slightly at a tangent to this. One of the biggest issues we found with cloud services being used by IT departments is that IT people cannot stop thinking like service providers. They cannot think like customers. And one of the big changes that has to happen as you're consuming cloud services is that you have to start thinking of yourself as a consumer, not just as a service provider. And that changes quite a few things. And so we discussed that a little bit in the book and the changes in mindset that have to happen when you start using cloud services as an IT professional. I'm not going to cover too much on this, except to say that the other thing we found with this journey is that it's not linear, or not always linear. We found, for example, that we explore cloud services, we come up with some requirements, we expand on them and engage, we communicate them and offer, and then we realize there are a bunch of things we didn't think about. So we go back and we have to redefine or modify some of our requirements before we can move any further down the journey. So, you know, this is kind of a bunch of cycles that move you along the path. And we really had to think about that more. And those arrows are just indicative. They don't take them too literally. It just means that stuff keeps happening in cycles. Now, how do we define cloud? You know, again, when we started writing this book, we thought, well, cloud, it's cloud, right? Well, it turns out we couldn't have been more wrong. The cloud is one of the most complicated things you can think of. And just to give you an illustration as to why it's so complex, we just took two scales or continua or spectra, whatever you want to call them. So we looked at two extremes. And the first question we said is, how do people use the cloud? And the first extreme was, well, there are some organizations that use the cloud as a sort of standardized, commoditized components. These are typical IT people, right? We have servers today. Instead of managing them in-house, they become so commoditized, we're going to manage them as virtual devices in the cloud, almost on a one-for-one basis, right? So we kind of take what we're doing today, but we do it in the cloud. Standardized, commoditized, not very different to the way we work today. And then on the other side, you have a bunch of people in the organization. I guess the correct term for them is product managers. But these are people sitting in business units typically. And what they're doing is they're using the cloud to do really innovative things. Digital marketing, reaching new markets, creating new types of online services. Wow, it's exciting, it's innovative, it's emergent, it uses artificial intelligence and so on. So we have these two ends of the spectrum. They're completely different. They use the cloud in completely different ways. But here's the trick. You've really guessed it, Kylie. They're in the same organization. Well, now you have to govern an environment like this. And it was bad enough when it was just us and Shadow IT. Right now it's us and Shadow IT and a bunch of people who are kind of somewhere on the spectrum. Right? So that's the first thing. And yes, Bhupender, yes, we did actually work with a number of consumer organizations to get their experience on this. So you'll see both the cloud service provider's perspective as well as the consumer's perspective reflected in the book. We did not take sides. I think if something's going to go wrong, it's on both sides. And we fought that battle very hard. Then the second spectrum that we used was, okay, how do you manage? How do you govern in your organization? And again, we had these extremes. We have the one crowd that really wants to be strongly centralized. Everything needs to come through one channel, right? It needs to be controlled and regulated through that one channel. On the other side, we have this emerging group of self-managing teams, cross-functional teams, highly agile, responding to really volatile environments that have to be able to be very flexible to be able to meet their customers' demands. And when I say these things, I'm not at all being sarcastic. There are legitimate reasons why you would want to do that. And yeah, people are doing that. So, and again, the same situation. They're in the same organization. Well, what we found, of course, and here's a secret, if you didn't know this already, if you want to look really smart, what you do is you find any two spectrums or spectra and you turn one vertical and you create a grid. And suddenly you've got this magic quadrant and it looks really smart. So that's what we did. We just turned one on the side. And now we have 4 cloud models. And you'll find this in the book. By the way, I think this was the last thing we did in the book. So this was the end result of everything that we did. And we came up with this idea that in a very standardized environment where you have centralized control, you have a type 1 cloud, which is basically back office functions being provided by a classic IT department. That's one use of cloud. Where you have standardized use of cloud, but it's decentralized, then in worst case, you just have chaos, cloud sprawl, uncontrolled use of cloud. However, if you achieve that, a fair amount of consistency in governance, then what you have is IT becomes a broker of services. So IT's role changes from being a service provider to being a broker, with some of the elements provided internally and many of the elements being provided from a cloud service provider or other outsourcing organization. Type 3 is one where you have a lot of centralization, but you're working with emergent technology. And that model is used typically by groups who are experimenting. So typical R&D type groups, the garage, what can we do to improve customer experience kind of thing. That's typically the type of group that uses that. And then type 4, highly emergent, highly decentralized. Those are typically, people like agile development teams and so on, product owners who are doing something very innovative on the cutting edge. So there you go, just some idea of the range of ways in which cloud services are used and have to be managed. And all of them require a different way of managing. Yes, love the good old 2x2. And yeah, somebody wants a 4x4. Good luck, produce it, please. And, and put it in the supplementary guide with a picture of the Chelsea. There you go. Now, there is a link between DIT's, digital and IT strategy, and cloud, and it was stronger than we thought. The fact is that a cloud strategy, and everybody talks about a cloud strategy as if it is a strategy. It is not really a strategy, it's a tactic. It is strategic to those who have to manage the cloud solution, but it is tactical at best to everybody else in the organization. The strategic component of cloud is defined in the digital strategy, if you have one. The cloud is simply one of the many components which enable you to be a digitally enabled organization, or in other words, to base part of your business on digital technology. Cloud is one aspect of that, and therefore cloud cannot be an entire strategy in and of itself. It has to be subject to something else in the organization, which is either a digital strategy, an IT strategy, or an enterprise strategy. It cannot exist on its own. So those organizations who went cloud first as a strategy found themselves in serious trouble, mainly because not everything belongs in the cloud. There are certain things that you really don't want to put in the cloud, and we cover that in the book quite a bit. So the one thing we originally thought was the relationship with the CSP is strategic. And we wrote that in the book. And then the CSPs got hold of this and said, no, we're not. You may view us as strategic, but we don't view you as strategic. I'm saying it rather bluntly, but essentially that was the message. You're only strategic to us in as much as you use the same services as everybody else. You're strategic to us when you submit a feature request that we approve. But we don't sit on your strategy boards. We don't take direction from your boards. Well, they say that, of course, if you're strong enough and big enough and you pay enough money, likely they will. But for the rest of us, no, it's like buying a book. You go to a bookshop, you take a book off the shelf, you go to the cashier and you pay for it. You don't take two books and say, I'd like page 1 through 10 from this book. I'd like page 25 to 80 of that book, and please bind them together for me in a new volume. They won't do it. Neither does a cloud service provider. So the cloud service provider relationship, while it may be strategic to us, is not very strategic to them. The only thing that's strategic to them is that there is a demand for the services that they provide. And so, yes, it's very important to them that they will listen and they will track that demand, but they do not respond easily to individual customizations and feature requests. Here's the best part of the whole book. I have to tell you, it's great. It doesn't look it, I know, but trust me, it is. Let me walk you through this. This is, excuse me, I'm going to clear my throat again. Almost gone. So I'll do my best to finish up here with whatever voice I have left. This flower-looking thing is the center of a much bigger thing. And I'm going to start simple and then build it up. It was originally called the Theater of Cloud Service Value Co-Creation. Theater in the sense that it describes the terrain in which you will be working. Not theater in the sense that it is so bad that you need to be operated upon. So the Theater of Cloud Service Value Co-Creation quickly got its name changed because nobody could remember it, to the Value Co-Creation Map. And basically what this thing does, it's actually pretty good. What it does is it says, what is your strategy as an organization? Depending on your strategic driver, which service management practices are going to help you most? And which parts of those practices are going to be most helpful to you? So it is, in fact, a way of mapping what you need to do to support your cloud strategy. And we chose 5 main things. So at the center there is cloud service provision and consumption. The reason you do it is to achieve one or more of 5 things. You either want to improve your consumer experience, you want to increase your operational excellence, so performance, efficiency, etc. You want to build a more reliable, resilient, and continuous set of services. You may want to achieve better governance and control, or you may want to be highly agile and adaptable in your strategy. You can change these out, by the way, but generically, those are the things that most people try to achieve by moving to the cloud, or in fact, by moving to any kind of solution. Now, what's interesting about this is that you can take this and you can map it to the ITIL practices. With a little bit of extra effort, you can map it to pretty much anything. But take operational excellence, for example, and this is not exhaustive. I'm just giving you an example. If you know that the main reason for doing cloud is to achieve operational excellence improvements, then ITIL will help you by putting in place better incident management, problem management, change enablement, and a few other things as well, capacity, and so on. There's a few listed there. But what's really helpful about this is it breaks it down and it says, these are things that the consumer has to do. These are things that can be delegated to the cloud service provider, and in some cases must be delegated to the cloud service provider, or the cloud service provider must have their own counterpart in their organization to the counterpart in your organization. Change management is one of those, for example, or sorry, change enablement, as we call it these days. So there you go. Now, so basically what you do is you define your digital strategy or even your enterprise strategy. And in that strategy, you define which strategic drivers are important for you. So here's just some random examples. This is in the book. But a bank who wants to focus on back office cloud solution for internal consumers, an IT department, strategic adaptability is not their main aim. Their main aim is to achieve greater governance and control, which they can't do internally for some reason or not. What they would do is map the practices associated with governance and control The second one is reliability, resilience, and continuity. They would map those out. And those would be the practices they would need to focus on most in adapting to the new cloud relationship. So this map of value co-creation is a very helpful way of helping us practitioners to identify the areas that are most important and that we need to focus most of our attention on in building forward. The big thing looks like this, and the circle around it, this sort of lavender thing, are all the sources of information that will tell you what practices need to be changed. So there'll be, of course, there's ITIL right there, industry best practices and standards. There's more than ITIL, of course, there are a number of others. There are best practices that come from the cloud service provider. There are architectural principles, both in the cloud service provider as well as in our own organization. Then around that, we have continual improvement, and we have relationship management with whoever we're working with in the cloud service provider. If we get all of that right, then we're achieving cloud service value. And if we're doing it especially right, we can do that even in environments that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that is the entire theater of co-creation. We kind of like the word theater, but then, of course, some smart individual called it the circus of value co-creation. We didn't like that. We felt that it was uncharitable. We felt at least you could have called it a carnival, because then you've got all the sideshows included. I personally prefer to call it the opera of cloud value co-creation, because in an opera, basically two people see each other across a crowded town square, they fall in love, they run away together after knowing each other, not even knowing each other, after having seen each other, and then it ends up with one of them getting killed. So for me, anyway, sorry, that's my sarcastic side comes in. Yes, it's nicely Bupende. If it worked well, it definitely would be a symphony. You're right. So, that's what's in the book, and there's a lot more in it. I couldn't do justice to everything that's in it, but that gives you a very good overview of what is in the book and why we did some of the things we did. I've put my contact details here. Please do feel free to reach out. LinkedIn is always very easy. Send me an email by all means. And as a special deal, because we love you so much, and we do, I actually really do appreciate this group of people a lot. We are actually giving away, for anybody who watches this, some free advisory sessions, which basically means you're working with the cloud, you're not sure where to go, or you're having some problems, happy to sit down with you for an hour of time, free consulting basically. All you have to do is click on this, get access to my calendar, book your time, and I'll be happy to sit down with you for an hour. Your time, you discuss what we want to discuss. If I can help, I will. If I can't, I'll tell you. And so, so there you are. That's it. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, David. That was really great. You've only lost maybe 4 or 5 people at the most, so I think that
those are the smart ones.
Yeah. How much everybody's really appreciated it. So thank you so much, and also for your generous offer. That's wonderful. So yes. If you'd like to take David up on the offer of the 60-minute meeting, which I think is incredibly generous and would be an amazing use of your time. And I really like this, the final point, David. For maximum results, we encourage cloud decision makers to attend. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, I will tell you, if all you want to do is shoot the breeze for an hour, I'm happy to do that, but you don't have to book this session to do that. Just get a hold of me on LinkedIn and we can spend some time together. One of the things I like to do, I'm based in Dallas, here in Texas, in the USA. And one of the things I like to do for people who are in the area is to sit down and have lunch, talk about whatever we want to talk about. And it is just surprising how much value there is in just picking each other's brains. Be happy to do that. If you find yourself in Dallas, let me know. If you don't, let's set up a meeting and talk anyway.
Yeah,
it's great.
So it's so easy these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
And some people may even find themselves in Dallas now that the world's starting to open back up. So
yeah, I don't know why they would, but take you to the rodeo. How about that?
Anyway, thank you so much, and thank you everyone who's been attending and for listening all the way through. We will be publishing the video on our playlist, so we'll let everybody know when that's available, so you can rewatch it or tell other people how fantastic it was. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you all soon at one of our future events. And thank you again, David and Mark as well.